All right, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order and get started. First of all, let me thank everyone for being here, all the commission members for being here, and let me apologize for not being able to be with you yesterday. I had an engagement in Atlanta that I had to attend with the governor, and I appreciate his trust in me to swear me in as the chairman of the Behavioral Health and Reform Commission. We're going to take on some mental health issues in the state over the next 4 years, and looking forward to getting that work underway. Very passionate about transportation, education, and mental health, the things that affect all of Georgia. So today we're going to continue to move forward with the Freight Commission. We had a great meeting a while back with GDOT and our Department of Economic Development, and I know from talking with Chairman Beach, you all had a great meeting yesterday, and the Commission had a great tour of the port. One of the main reasons we're having this conversation, and I know the speaker said this early on, that we've got a world-class port and we've got to have a world-class freight logistics system, is because of where we're sitting here today in Savannah, Georgia, and Brunswick, and the port and the amount of freight it's bringing into our state. So today the focus of the meeting is around the port and people who move freight in and out of the port. So we appreciate this opportunity to be here. I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Beach for a welcome, and then we'll get kicked off with our first presenter.
Well, thank you, Chairman Tanner, and congratulations on being appointed to the Mental Health Chair. We got a few people that weren't here yesterday. If we could go around, we introduced everybody. We'll start with you, Senator Gooch.
Well, you just introduced me. So, Steve Gooch from Dahlonega, District 51. Represent parts of Forsyth County, Dawson, Lumpkin, White, Union, Fannin, Gilmer, and Pickens. Good to be here. And it's hot in Savannah, by the way.
All right.
Chris Clark, I'm president of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce.
Okay. Anybody else? And I'm going to make one introduction, and we've got the Dean of the House, Calvin Smyre, but I want to congratulate him, and I'd like y'all to give him a round of applause. He was just named from AFLAC a Lifetime Achievement Award in Washington, D.C., which was a great honor, so congratulations, Calvin. Well deserved, well deserved. How many years have you been serving? 45 years. That's got to be one of the longest in the country, so thank you for your service to the state. And I will tell you, this guy has been with us on House Bill 170, House Bill 930, and he's going to be with us on this, and we appreciate all your hard work on transportation. Good. I also want to recognize a DOT board member, Ann Purcell, who was chairman until, I guess, last month. Thank you for your service to GDOT. Appreciate you being here. And with that, I'll turn it back. Yeah. Any other board members? I don't see. Okay. All right. With that, we'll turn it over to Chairman Tanner, and we'll get this meeting started.
All right. Thank you. Our first presenter today, talking about freight mobility in Georgia, is CSX and Norfolk Southern, our two Class 1 railroads in the state. They're a big partner in this effort we're working on, and I will tell you, both Craig and Connor do a wonderful job for their companies, but they also do a good job for us as policymakers at the state capitol. We lean on them heavily when it comes to the rail industry, and we could not do what we do in freight in this state if it wasn't for the management and the employees of CSX and Norfolk Southern, our two Class 1 railroads, and then all of our short line rail companies that are represented here in Georgia moving freight. So we appreciate what you do. And to introduce our first couple of presenters, I want to ask Craig Musso to come up. He is with CSX. He is our contact that we deal with pretty much on a daily basis. Craig, thank you for your friendship and what you do for the state of Georgia. So, Craig.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Beach, Chairman Tanner, members of the Commission. We're delighted to be here today, and we know that you heard yesterday from the Georgia Port Authority, and we are honored with our partnership that we have with GPA. A couple of quick things about the rail industry in Georgia. We're in the top 10 in employment. We're in the top 10 in rail miles. We're in the top 10 in ton miles from a national perspective. So as the chairman said, with Norfolk Southern and CSX combined with our short line partners, we believe we make up one of the backbones of the state of Georgia from economic development. Today you're going to hear from two gentlemen that work very closely with the Georgia Port. First will be Randy Bales, who is the group manager for ports for Norfolk Southern, and the second will be Carl Warren, who is the Director of Port Development for CSX. He's located out of Jacksonville. So we appreciate the opportunity to present, and without further ado, I'll ask Randy to get up and present.
Thank you, Commission members, guests, for having Norfolk Southern participate in this meeting today. It's very important for us to, as we partner with a state, with a port that's so focused on growth and is willing to invest in their port, it's exciting for us to be a partner in that. You know, I flew in yesterday, flew through Atlanta, coming from Norfolk, and you really get a good perspective of what's going on here when you fly over the port. It's, you know, you fly over, you see, I was at the State of the Port a couple of weeks ago, and Griff did a great job of talking about the investments in cranes and everything, and you fly over and you see it, and it's gigantic, and it's a rainbow of colors of containers, just stacks and stacks. And, you know, we're excited to be a part of that. So Griff showed you kind of yesterday with his presentation and with the tour, you know, what happens inside the marine terminals. We're going to talk a bit about what happens once it leaves the marine terminal, where it's going to. I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are, trends that affect the Georgia ports, where the volume's going to, and then the projects that we have that will handle future growth. So just a brief thing about Norfolk Southern. You can see that we're a Eastern Railroad. We're blessed by geography in that we're in the area that serves a majority of U.S. consumers, energy consumption, manufacturers. So we feel like that we've got a big opportunity for growth in that we have so much within our territory. And if you look, you know, we're kind of east of the Mississippi River. There's some arrows on the map that will show where we connect to Western railroads, and that extends our reach even further. So if a container comes in or a shipper in Georgia needs to get to the West Coast or Western markets, we can interchange through our railroad with a Western railroad to get you there. We've got a robust coal network. Our merchandise network is strong, you know, focusing on chemicals, crude, automotive, especially in the Southeast with all the auto manufacturing in the Southeast. In the intermodal, we've got about 55 intermodal facilities across our network. So we've worked really hard at getting as close to the consumer as we can, and that helps us compete daily with trucks. And then we also connect with about 250 short-line railroads across our network. They're very important to our company. Some of the trends that we see that affect the Georgia ports that we look at a lot, and I know the Georgia port does as well, is, you know, what ports are growing, what ports aren't. You know, and since 2001, there's been a steady migration of container business from the West Coast ports to the East Coast as beneficial cargo owners, BCOs as we call them, want to diversify their ports of entry. And if you look, this goes back about 10 years, I think, and I kind of look at 5 port areas: Western Canada, Pacific Northwest, Pacific Southwest, and the East Coast ports. What it's telling me is Western Canada is growing, but that's mostly at the expense of the Pacific Northwest. They've taken a lot of their freight. The Pacific Southwest, LA Long Beach, they're still the largest by volume just because of their proximity to Asia, but their rate of growth is smaller. It's like 3%. Where the growth is on the East Coast ports, and that's been magnified lately by the Panama Canal expansion, the Bayonne Bridge heightening projects that lets the larger ships come to the East Coast. And the Georgia ports are in an excellent position because of where they're located. You're really the first major port of call once you come through the Panama Canal. So what has that done for Norfolk Southern? Well, if you go back 10 years, about over half of our business touched a West Coast port. You fast forward to today, 75% comes in through an East Coast port. So before, a lot of our focus, and it's still a focus, is on how do we interchange freight that's coming off the West Coast, connecting with a Western carrier to have a good seamless interchange, given a speed to the east. Now it's how do we serve the ports? How do we extend their market reach? Do we have enough cars to support the growth? So it's really changed how we think over the last few years. if you look at this map, and it's a little, some of the destinations are a little small on here, but it shows the market reach from, this is our intermodal services from the Georgia, from Garden City terminals. And you can see we reach all of the major points in the southeast. We even get up into the Midwest. And that really ties in with the GPA's Mid-America Arc and what they're trying to do as well. If you look at where the traffic's going today, the largest amount of traffic, over half of our traffic, goes to the Atlanta market from Garden City. Memphis would be the next largest point, Charlotte, and Huntsville. So that makes up about 85% of the traffic that moves through Garden City terminals. The rest goes to the Chicago, St. Louis, Cincinnati. And where Savannah is located, I mean, it's conceivable you could have a strong service to the Midwest. We just, and we've talked to the port a lot about this, density drives a good service. We also have a strong automotive presence at the Georgia ports. We have 7-day-a-week service going in and out of Savannah, going in and out of Brunswick, and that attracts shippers such as Mercedes-Benz over in Alabama, Toyota up in Indiana. So it's a very robust automotive service that we offer. And then on the general merchandise side, what we call our carload business, there's just a variety of products that move through the state, primarily export, and a lot of that is manufactured or produced here in the state of Georgia. We got clay over in Sandersville and other places. We got a lot of paper products from various paper mills around the state. There's wood products, wood chips, wood pulp. There's, Moosite from Andersonville. And then you also handle heavy equipment that comes out of the Midwest. So there's it's a very diversified market on our merchandise network that moves through the port. So we've kind of talked a little bit about the freight that moves through the port. We know there's the opportunity for growth, just the positioning of the port and the investment that the port's making to grow. But there's also challenges as well. We need to be able to, once the containers are ready for rail, they need to be able to get through our network into the market. So we've identified, and we've been working with GDOT on a number of projects that will help us handle either longer trains or to be able to do a double stack service to certain markets. If you look down at the green line between Savannah and Macon, there's a couple of siding projects there, Tennell and Blandford. And today we do about 10 trains a day in and out of the port. The average length's about 8,200 feet. So once those sidings, and for those who don't know what sidings are, I'll just step back a second. We have a lot of single stack or single track structure throughout the southeast. So when trains meet, we have to have a place to put one of the trains while they pass. And a train can only be as long as the shortest siding. And with more and more freight coming, we need to build longer trains, so we need longer siding. So that's what Tennell and Blandford accomplished for us. So when that's done, I think what we'll go to is 13 trains a day at 10,000 feet. So that's quite an increase in capacity. And there's also a reduction in idle time as trains wait at those meets with these siding projects. The red line is, we've been working with the port with this about how do you get better access to the Charlotte market. And today, things go to traffic that would come out of, intermodal traffic that would come out of the port, would go to Atlanta, and then would catch an Atlanta to Charlotte train. There's the opportunity in the future of having a double stack service that would go from Savannah to Charlotte. So we're working to clear that route. We've got some overhead obstructions that we have to take care of on that. But for the future, that could be a double stack route, and it would be able to allow us to compete with trucks in that market. And then the blue line, the Atlanta-Macon capacity, there's a couple of projects there. One that we call the S-Line Clearance Project, and the other is a Macon siding project. And what those allow us to do, you can kind of see it's two routes between Atlanta and Macon. It allows you to do a few things. You could run intermodal on one of the routes. You can run carload on another. You can run directional east on one route, westbound on the other route. So there's a lot of things that we're able to do here with that improvement. And again, we appreciate the assistance that we've received on this from GDOT. We also have, for intermodal traffic, once it leaves the port, once it gets through Georgia, it's got to land at a marine terminal or at an intermodal facility. So some capacity projects that we have at some of our larger terminals, Austell in Atlanta, Memphis, the Memphis Regional Intermodal Facility, and Chicago Landers. And a traditional intermodal facility is a container comes off of a car and it gets placed on a chassis. And it's really like a big parking lot. So what we're going to go for in the future is kind of what you saw at Garden City Terminals. It'll look more like a marine terminal. Containers will be stacked. You'll have big overhead RTGs, rubber tire gantry cranes that'll be working those trains. So it'll make our facilities more efficient in that we'll make better use of our space, better use of chassis because there'll be less of them on our terminal, and we think we'll be able to provide a better product for containers that come through this port. And also, Georgia Ports announced a couple of years ago about the Northeast Georgia Inland Port in Gainesville in Hall County. So, this was really in response to, there's a lot, this kind of meets the criteria for an inland port in that there's existing business there today that you could capture immediately. And it's very difficult because of new driver regulations for a driver to exit the Georgia port, get to that facility and back in a day. So because you can't do that in a day, the costs go up. So the Georgia Port identified a piece of property in Gainesville. It's on the Norfolk Southern line. It'll help us better connect the Northeast Georgia market with Atlanta. Today, that traffic goes to our Austell facility, which is on the west side of Atlanta, a lot of it that doesn't get trucked, and then gets trucked back to that market. So this will cut out some of the kind of the redundancy of the route of that. And that'll handle about 150,000 containers. And it's, when it was announced, it was going to be a 2021 completion. That's been pushed back as the port works through some funding issues related to the site. And then we're going to be neighbors. That's one thing we're happy about. We're going to be locating to Atlanta in 2021. I'm in Norfolk, Virginia today, so for me, it's pretty exciting. I get to go to a lot more Auburn games. It gets me a lot closer. Sorry for saying that in this room. And in closing, I just want to say we appreciate all the efforts of GDOT in a lot of our projects. We appreciate the partnership that we have with the state of Georgia, with the Georgia Port, and we want to continue looking at ways that we can move freight efficiently through the state of Georgia from the ports. And we're going to identify some capacity projects throughout the state that affect our railroad, and Connor will be talking to a number of you in this room for your assistance. Thank you.
Yes, you want to hear, they're both from the railroad and then ask questions, or do you just want to do Norfolk? If you
I need
don't
a
mind-
minute to chamber this up, so.
Yeah, if you
may
don't
as well
mind,
do a
come
couple
back up for
questions.
just a second. I think Senator Gooch has a question.
Yeah, why don't you go on this side, then I can work on getting the other slides up.
Can you go back to the slide that has
Go ahead. Knock 'em back.
the diagram of the rails coming out of Savannah?
This one?
One more, right there.
Hold on, let me get there.
There you go.
That one.
So lines 1, 2, and 3, they're obviously spelled out there in destinations, but what are the typical speeds of your trains on each of those segments? Are there different speeds at different places, and can you explain what that is?
I don't have the specific speeds for each market group. I do know that, typically an intermodal train is gonna have more speed, and our speed is affected by sidings. You're going through a lot of towns that have crossings, so that does bring our speed down a bit. And then carload type business is going to be a little bit lower, but I don't have any specifics. I don't know if Connor, if you have any specifics on that.
Connor probably doesn't know. I'm kidding.
Senator Gooch, I'll get that for you.
Well, and if I may, I'd like to ask a couple more questions.
Yes.
So I imagine you have a adequate amount of right-of-way. Is there a typical right-of-way width on a railroad like Norfolk Southern or CSX? Is it 50 feet, 100 feet?
I don't know the answer to that.
My question is, why wouldn't you build parallel tracks and not rely on the sidings?
Well, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the others from Norfolk Southern, it would be a pretty considerable expense considering the amount of single track that we have kind of in Georgia and the
I'm sure it would.
southeast. That it's more efficient for us with the number of trains to address the
Okay.
sidings.
I'm just trying to figure out what we can do to help increase capacity, get trucks off the roads,
Right.
so forth and so on. The other question would be, do you have a list, 5 or 6 things that the Georgia General Assembly can do to help your industry? Like bullet points, tax credits, better coordination with state agencies, blah, blah, blah. Do you have a list of those you could make available to us?
We will have a list of those.
And maybe compare Georgia to what other states have done in the last 10 years to help
Okay.
your industry?
Right, I'll get with
All
Connor
right.
and
Thank
we'll
you.
address that.
Appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah, I think in follow-up to that, I think that's one of the questions I was going to ask, and then ask Mr. Warren the same thing, is specifically what are the challenges that are preventing you from continuing to grow and increase capacity? And I know we heard from Commissioner McMurray, did a great job at our last meeting presenting the freight logistics plan, and a lot of that encompasses some of those crossings and other problems you have. But I think in order for this commission to be successful, we're going to have those very specific wish list or needs items there, so that we understand what is preventing you from being successful. So if both you and CSX and even the short lines can help us with that, that's really the information we need. So,
Okay.
yes, ma'am.
I guess I'm on. Felicia Moore from Atlanta.
Thank you.
Hi, Craig. I've been trying to get your attention. But I wanted to ask a question because you've mentioned lengthening the trains. So could you explain a little bit more about how much longer will that be and how that will impact railroad crossings?
Well, that's a great question, because one of the things that you try to do is you try to minimize.
Might want to talk in the mic.
You try to minimize the interaction of people, freight, trucks, and so crossings are a great example. As I said, our average train length through Georgia coming in out of the ports is about 8,200 feet. We'd like to, with a 10,000-foot siding, obviously we want to take advantage of that, and we want to make our trains more productive by making them longer. So we would like the opportunity to have those discussions about where are our concerns at crossings, because there are obviously community
When you
concerns.
say longer, how much longer?
Well, that's 2,000 feet longer,
Okay,
somewhere in that ballpark.
okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Grab the mic there.
Randy, I really appreciate your comments concerning economics. I keep thinking about the port and how it plans to double TEUs in the next few years. And I just keep thinking about the mission of this commission to decongest. And so it's really a philosophical question, which I'd like to follow up with you in the future, is just that from my experience in justifying rail capital, and you kind of alluded to that, it's really hard, I think, for any rail provider on short lengths of haul, like Atlanta to Savannah. And I'm just really curious. Again, I'd like to spend more time thinking what it would take in terms of getting more substantial investment, similar to what the representative said, and growth on that short length of haul, because that's an economic challenge.
It is. It's luckily it's very dense. So railroads, as you know, have a lot of fixed costs. So density does address that. Where the struggle is short hauls, such as up in Hall County. because you need that density, and it's a challenge. It does help when the state of Georgia is willing to put capital into a facility that we don't have to put into. That does help our cost structure on these short-haul routes. But yeah, I'd love to have that discussion.
Very good.
Any other questions? All right, we may have some after our next presentation from CSX. Thank you.
Thank you. That's okay. Yeah, give me just a moment here. I need to find my way around this computer and get this thing open. Here it is. There we go. All right. Well, good morning. Thank you very much for offering CSX the opportunity to talk about these important issues. I'm going to take a little bit narrower a focus. I thought Randy's presentation was wonderful because it really dealt with the dynamics around Class 1 operations in this region. I would say, we're obviously competitors with each other, but at the same time, there's also a lot of things that we have in common. I would say, generally speaking, the network characteristics are very similar. Atlanta's also a very important place for us from an origin-destination perspective. And we've got a few markets that we go to that Norfolk Southern doesn't, and the same is true of them versus us. We go to Nashville, for example. We've recently opened an inland port with the assistance of the state and GPA in Northwest Georgia that we're very, very excited about. So there's some little nuances there, but I mean, I think from what I understood about the challenge that this committee faces, one of the things is, and I think I just heard you say it earlier, what are those things that we need to be thinking about to assure success? And I was fortunate early in my career to deal with some of these things. I used to work out west at a western railroad called Burlington Northern Santa Fe. And before that, I was involved in some transportation planning in the Pacific Northwest. And one of the projects I worked on when I was out there was a project called the FAST Corridor. And what the FAST Corridor was it involved 23 different jurisdictions and 3 or 4 port authorities and 2 Class 1 railroads. And the problem that they were facing at that time, this is shortly after I was finishing graduate school, was that they saw that the ports of Seattle and Tacoma were growing very aggressively. They could see the trains were getting longer, and they could see that there were going to be serious mobility problems in the greater Puget Sound area because the infrastructure just was not ready for the ports to grow and for the railroads to start to handle bigger trains. I've seen that problem also tackled in Los Angeles with projects like the Alameda Corridor. And I think when we consider Georgia, I mean, I have to say, like, from my experience out west, as well as what I've experienced over the last 12 or so years at CSX, Georgia has really led the way in terms of scaling up its infrastructure to deal with growth. And we've seen this consistently with the Georgia Ports Authority, with the work that Griff is doing, the very aggressive development plan that you heard about yesterday. I'm not going to waste your time by repeating it today because I think you know what it is. But I think one of the things that needs more consideration, time, and thought really falls in 2 areas. One of them is in terms of addressing that conflict between road and rail by attacking opportunities to get grade separations done around the port. I think there's a lot of bang for the buck, not only from the perspective of enabling the efficiency of the port and the rail partners, but also from a community perspective. I think that there has to be a fair amount of sensitivity to where you put these things and how they're designed, because people have to live around them too. You can't block out businesses and make it impossible for people to make a living, but at the same time, you also don't want to create a situation where the success that's leading to billions of dollars of investment, lots and lots of activity at the port, then turns into a set of externalities that the public isn't going to be very tolerant of. So we really think that that's a good point of focus. The other point of focus is, and that's really largely centered around our intermodal business, although I'd say it impacts our carload business also, but also just in thinking about the interface between industrial sites that are within a reasonable drayage distance of the port and the port itself. So what I mean by that is some of the markets that Randy mentioned, things like the resins, paper, some of these other products, maybe not the ones that go direct to ship for bulk, but where there's a transload involved and maybe a packaging process or something like that occurs. You've got several industrial sites within, and I've got a map of them at the end here, within 10 or, I'd say between like 10 and 15 miles of the port. A lot of work has already been done on the road system with things like the Jimmy DeLoach Parkway and the other projects. But as these new ones continue to come online, there's a couple of short line sites. There's a Georgia Central site. There's the Omnitrack site. There's some sites on the Class 1s. As those come online, kind of being mindful of what's necessary to make sure that those trucks flow smoothly while the residents have the sort of system performance they'd expect from the road system. So I was appreciative that Randy started getting these questions about trains and train size and stuff, because it actually fit in very well to one of the concepts I wanted to talk about today. So this illustration here sort of shows how you would get a 10,000-foot train to arrive or depart the new mega rail terminal that you saw under construction yesterday. This is great for CSX. It's a big process improvement, because what it does is it gets us to a point where we'll be able to operate larger trains, but to do it, we still have some community issues that I think we're going to have to overcome. I'm going to describe our existing process, and then I'm going to describe our future process. So our existing process is driven by this illustration. I apologize, it's a little bit busy, but pay attention to the 4,200 feet existing. That's the greatest amount of clear length that we can get for a train between our main line and the current GPA facilities. So what we do when we send trains out of town is oftentimes we'll build an intermodal train by having a switching carrier make 2 or 3 trips between our main yard in Savannah, our main intermodal yard, and the GPA facility. So that could be 6 sets of grade crossing activations just for the purpose of getting one train out of town. The future state, which in the short run I think is okay, but I think over the long run we need to really think hard about this. The future state is that you have a longer train, a 10,000-foot train, that's going to transit through that corridor once and then go right onto the CSX network and not stop in the yard. But we're cognizant. I mean, there's a reason we put the average daily traffic figures on that map. Many of you are probably familiar with the characteristics of this road system from other projects. We're obviously concerned about this and would very much like to continue to engage on what are the best alternatives we can come up with to separate this rail and road activity. This is a problem lurking around the corner, and I think it's better that we start talking about it now than have to face it after everybody's upset when the trains come, because the trains are coming. I mean, the port's growing. There's a huge imperative on the rail industry to be more efficient and run larger trains. So this is something that I think we can still get ahead of, but I think the time to start thinking about it is now.
So I'm going to make a violent segue to the carload side of the business. And this is very exciting to us because, not only do we deliver intermodal traffic to the port, but the other thing we do is a lot of carload transloading. And this set of dots reflects, this is actually prepared on a study that we did on the plastic resin business in the Savannah area. And so we identified some places where we felt that there were sites that would be either supporting that or suitable for it. And I even have some places that NS gets to on here. So those two sort of brownish dots are jointly served sites, both of which have seen a lot of interest and a lot of activity. The red dots are places that CSX gets to exclusively. The bottom yellow dot over there is a site on the Georgia Central where the Plastics Express project is happening. And then the green dot is actually Ocean City Terminal, because that's a place where Norfolk Southern had started a plastic resin operation with A&R Logistics in the port. But it just kind of gives you a sense for the landscape. In particular, I think these, if it's not already under study, these sites in Rincon area, that are alongside Georgia 21 are relevant for paying attention to. I think the circulation getting closer to the port has obviously been improved methodically over the last few years, but I think this may be an opportunity. I think the GERP site is going to be in excess of 7 million square feet. The other two sites are capable of generating a similar amount of square footage, which means they're going to generate a similar amount of truck traffic. And so the effectiveness of that interface is important locally, and it's important to our success as a transportation partner also. So I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to take any questions, and very, very appreciative of your time and interest.
Thank you. One thing, and I appreciate you hitting on some very specific items there, but I know over the past couple of years, the number of legislators talking to me that live in communities and represent communities that have trains is about blocked crossings, and you mentioned that. I know that GDOT's very cognizant of that, and in their freight logistics plan talk about a lot of those challenges. But it seems like that's probably one of the biggest challenges facing our state, where the rub's going to come between the trains and the people living in those communities. And even the legislators who've talked to us have said, look, the train brings tremendous amounts of job opportunities and economic development to our community, so we love the train.
Right.
But we have people who are not able to get to their homes and their neighborhoods. So I think that's one of the areas that we as a state are going to have to put some money in to make some changes and some other opportunities for folks to get to these neighborhoods. Is that, in your opinion, one of the biggest challenges that's going to face us from a
Yeah,
rail?
I do. I mean, I'd echo what Randy was saying also about the importance of keeping people and trucks and trains away from each other. I think that's really in everybody's best interest to achieve that. And so, yeah, I would say that should be high on the list.
And from I know you've got the intermodal inland port facility, up in Chatsworth that you service. Has that been thus far as successful as you envisioned? Do you feel like from a company that was money well spent by the port? I know we've talked a lot, and I know some of our board members even talked about the idea of how we can use rail and how we can use this freight problems to improve opportunities in rural Georgia and create economic development opportunities. I know it's early in the process, but are you seeing success there?
Absolutely. I almost have to thank you for that question, because we really, really like what we're seeing up in the Chatsworth area. If you need an indicator, I think the fact that there's a GE appliance development happening up there, which has a link to the port, is indicative of what's possible from a local economic development perspective, driven by creating better transportation access through the creation of these inland ports. It's that location We always thought it was a good one. We did start slowly, admittedly, but you got to walk, you got to crawl before you walk, before you run. And, the first few months were kind of quiet. We were a little nervous about it. But the GPA has been relentless in pursuing this. Our people have been very serious about making the service effective, and we keep growing it. We expect that to continue. And I look at the possibility of 20, 40,000 trucks not having to transit through Atlanta, and I've got to believe that in addition to the job benefits locally, that's got to be a very compelling transportation benefit. And I think there are more opportunities like that in the state on both the Class 1 networks, and would really encourage you to think about that.
Yeah, one of the challenges, because we're looking at Gainesville, Hall County next, and you've got industries. I think the governor's going to be at Kubota today, which is a huge industry in North Georgia that ships all over the world their products, so they're going to be using that facility. But one of the things I think that we need to at least focus on is there's parts of our state, and as we've traveled the state with the Rural Development Commission over the past few years, that are losing population, have high unemployment, that are not having the same successes as the folks who live in the area that I represent in North Georgia. And maybe we can find ways in the future to take the inland port idea and other ideas around rail infrastructure and around freight infrastructure to some of these communities that desperately need economic development opportunities.
Well, I think one thing to think about too is that I think the Class 1's going to be a partner in that, but sometimes it's also a better match for the short lines, depending on the scale of the opportunity. But I think you'll find that the rail industry right now is eager to find creative ways to grow, and we're certainly, our door's always open, and I'm sure that the other rail carriers in the state would respond similarly fast.
Yes, sir.
Carl, I'd like to, again, build upon something Representative Tanner said a few minutes ago, and that was just with and Randy too, the short length of haul between Savannah and Atlanta. There's got to be some way to really encourage further investment, because the economics don't pencil from my experience on any Class 1. But how could we develop a public-private partnership? I'd just love to. You're not prepared today for this discussion, and this is going to be a long process, but I'd love to explore ways with the commission of how could we develop that kind of public-private partnership to increase the investment and substantially grow that short line corridor to take tremendous amounts. And you gave a few examples, Alameda Corridor, you gave Pacific Northwest. Those kinds of lessons could, it seems to me, apply here.
I think so, and I think if you frame up an effort like that, one of the things we learned on the FAST project years ago was that, you needed to kind of corral all the critical stakeholders for it, and also look at the rail networks together rather than by themselves. And I think if you do that, you're more likely to deploy the investment more efficiently, and you're more likely to create something that others will be willing to buy into. But we certainly would welcome the opportunity to participate further in such an effort. We agree with you.
Yeah, and I think following up on Mr. Skinner, having some further conversations with folks like you, CSX, Norfolk, and others, even if it's not in this larger meeting setting, but to really hone in and focus in on this idea of how can we spur on that type of investments, which in turn gives us the economic development opportunities that I think we're looking for in certain parts of our state. So I think those kind of conversations we need to be having, even if it's offline, to see what this commission can do to move that idea forward. So, yes.
I do want to emphasize the issue of the rail crossings and the issue of the cars, the impact y'all are having on the cities. I lived in Garden City, so I understand the issue of Garden City. I don't represent them now, but I know if Don were here, he'd be saying the same thing. We really need to make sure that's on the table when we start figuring out what we're going to do there. I appreciate a 10,000-foot train, but not when it's crossing and I got everybody sitting on either side of it waiting to get by. So it's something we really need to, we need to bring it all along together, not just the importance of 10,000-foot trains, but it's also the importance of people that live around those 10,000-foot trains. Real important. We need to really tie in both of them, because, they've done a great job at the ports in developing those new facilities, which will help tremendously. But as we get further out, and like you say, we need to, there's 80,000 cars they're looking to start coming from Effingham back and forth, and we don't have the capacity now on the roads, and if you start dragging a train across there for a while, it will create a lot of havoc. So if we can just, educate people and let them understand how we're going to get there, that'd be great.
Thank you.
And that's one of the things, and Commissioner McMurray talked about this when he presented the freight logistics plan a few weeks ago, but we know that we have work that's got to be done from a state perspective to spend the dollars in some of these communities to improve bypasses and overpasses and other opportunities to move around the trains, and like you said, to separate the vehicles from the trains, and that's important. But the issue really is it's costly, and the state, through the hard work of folks like Senator Gooch and others on House Bill 170, created $1 billion revenue stream for us to spend on roads and bridges across the state, and GDOT has done a tremendous job with that, stretching those dollars. But it still comes down to there's just not enough money to continue to invest the amount of dollars we need to invest to improve our freight logistics system. So I think it's important, though, from a public perspective, that we have those open conversations, because people need to hear that it affects real people, real lives, real communities each and every day. We need the trains. We need them to get longer. We need more of them. We need to move freight off the roads. But in doing that, we have to continue to invest in our infrastructure. And in order to invest in our infrastructure, somehow we have to fund that. And that's really the challenge, I think. And we heard, and I know Commissioner McMurray and GDOT's going to follow up when we do our last meeting of the year with what do those numbers look like. What we've heard, and we're going to continue to hear the issues. What would that cost the state to do what the speaker said, and that's to make a world-class freight logistics system. So that's important. Yes, sir.
Yeah, if I could just say Griff Lynch, Georgia Ports. If I could just, on behalf of the ports, thank both Norfolk Southern and CSX for the work they do. We have obviously I won't ask a lot of questions here because we're talking to them all the time. They do a wonderful job with us, and I think Carl and Randy both did a great job of kind of highlighting the things that they're focused on. I do want to say that, Mr. Mayor, as it relates to this, it really isn't just about 10,000-foot trains. We have had many conversations and much dialogue about trying to make sure as we grow the right way. And one of the things I discussed yesterday was with the mega rail, it's going to make it better than it is today. And we're today we build trains outside of our facility, and it really does bifurcate the community for extended periods of time. That all comes off of the community and will be done on terminal. So there's a long way to go. We agree there's a lot of work to be done, but I do want to thank you. One thing that I would say, really going all the way up to the executive leadership, there's a focus on Savannah, which we greatly appreciate, and Brunswick. The one thing I would ask for, having worked in multiple ports, is for both Class 1 railroads, maybe as you're putting your list together, to bring some benchmark ideas about how other states fund these types of programs and what are the things you're seeing in other places. And I'm sure we can learn from that. So that would be greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Griff. I mean, this wasn't something that I prepared for today, but just an observation to share it in light of that is, I'm sure you've had other meetings about this, but where you can bring land use together with transportation is probably elementary to most of you, but you can really get a lot more efficiency out of the dollars that you got to put into it if you can take advantage of, say, the co-location of an inland port and, say, like the new GE facility, and figuring out ways to concentrate investment there, look at where the industrial parks are in Savannah and figure out ways to concentrate investment at whatever the key pinch point is there. But I think factoring land use in should probably be part of something what you think about as well, where the land supply is in future as well as what you got now. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Next up is an industry that's near and dear to my heart, the poultry industry. Being from North Georgia and being a poultry farmer myself, people tell me my place stinks. I tell them it smells like money. But Mike Giles does a great job and has followed Abbott Massey, who did a great job, and we appreciate you being here and all that the Georgia Poultry Federation does. And people don't realize, if you live in different parts of the state, how big our poultry industry is, and I know we're going to hear about this, but a lot of birds are shipped out of the Savannah port. So, Mike, thank you for being here, and take it away.
Thank you, Chairman Tanner, Chairman Beach, members of the commission. That you're certainly right. There's a lot of poultry produced in Georgia, and that's really what I wanted to do this morning is talk about the size of the industry, and then translate that into what it takes to move the products around, the freight and logistics, challenges and opportunities. I think it'd be important to give you an idea of the little bit of a historical perspective on the size of the industry and our production levels, and also a distinction between the poultry as an agricultural commodity and other ag commodities. For example, poultry production is a steady increase over time. Just to give you some ideas, from 2017 to 2018, was a small increase in poultry production in Georgia, but it was 1.2%. If you go back 5 years, 2014, it was an 8% increase. Back to 2010, 18% increase. If you go to the year 2000, 32%. If you go back to 1990, which doesn't seem like that long ago, but I guess it is, but to illustrate how the industry can change over that time, is 116% increase. So it's slow, steady growth. It's very, very predictable. With other ag commodities, it can be influenced by things like weather. We saw this last year with Hurricane Michael. Cotton crop was devastated. You can see major differences year to year, and also depending on economics and planting intentions by farmers, you can see differences in how much cotton or corn is planted. But with poultry, it's steady. It's kind of like planting a tree in your yard. You don't notice that it grows a little bit one year to the next year to the next year. 20 years later, you look in your yard and you've got a full-grown tree. So there's no reason to believe that pattern of growth will be markedly different going forward. We still expect growth in future years, really driven by a number of things. Population increase here in the United States. As more people live here or born here, there'll be more demand for chicken. Per capita consumption continues to increase. The average person is eating more chicken than they did in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. It's over 90 pounds per person per year. And then clearly the biggest impact on the industry has been increases in trade, exports. In the early 1990s, and remember back, we're roughly twice the size in terms of production as we were. These are national figures in 1990, but we only exported at that time about 6% of all the chicken that we produced. Now we peaked in around 2015, exporting on a national level about 20% of all the poultry produced. So not only has the industry grown over the last 30 years, but the ratio, the amount of the proportion of chicken that's produced in the United States is now larger. 2015, we had a major avian influenza incident, and it was the largest foreign animal disease in American history, and we lost exports at that time. But we have recovered since then. We're not back up to 20%, but again, the industry has slowly grown. Quantity-wise, we're back to where we were in 2015. A number of notable impacts of that still remain, though, is China blocked the entire United States at the time. It was our major market. In the early days of exports, when our markets were really growing, was China and Russia, basically. And now when you look at our top 10 markets, China, now product probably still reaches China, but doesn't go there directly. It's inefficient. But our top export market now is Mexico. Last month's numbers, Cuba was number 3. Taiwan, Angola is in the top 10. Markets that really didn't even exist 10, 15 years ago are now major export markets for us. So we're more diversified, which we think is healthier. And markets that literally did not exist 3 years ago are now in the top 10. South Africa, for example. India we're back in. So the opportunities for trade and demand on trade side is really what's going to propel the industry again slowly, steadily in the future. Savannah is Georgia's fortunate. Poultry producers in Georgia. Georgia's the leading poultry producing state in the nation. We're fortunate that we have the Port of Savannah right here. And I think that really impacts, I think when I mentioned the 20% nationwide figure, the statewide figures are a little harder to parse out, but we know that the ratio of production that's exported here in Georgia is higher than the national average because of the proximity to the Port of Savannah. Port of Savannah is the largest poultry export port in the nation. And when you think about the freight and logistics and export demands, it's important not to just think about Georgia. We have product that's coming throughout the southeast. Georgia produces 1.34 billion chickens per year, but Alabama produces 1 billion. North Carolina produces close to 1 billion. Arkansas produces. So all this poultry is really produced in the southeastern United States. And Savannah is a major resource to us. And just while I'm talking about that, I just want to applaud the work that the Georgia Ports Authority has done over the years. Getting your product through the port efficiently and with customer service is really key to our industry, and the infrastructure improvements that have been made over the years really is the reason I think that increase has happened. So now I'll just switch to what does it take to move all that product around. How much product are we talking about? Nearly 1.4 billion chickens per year. What does that mean in pounds? Well, it's about 8 billion pounds of chicken produced in Georgia per year. That's about 15% of the national total. And the most important measurement in our industry is how much corn and soybeans does it take to produce a pound of chicken. So roughly speaking, it takes 2 pounds of feed to produce 1 pound of chicken. So it all starts with our friends in the rail business that bring corn and soybeans down to the industry. So if you're producing 8 billion pounds of chicken, you need 16 billion pounds of feed. Most of that comes in by rail to our feed mills. And then, of course, you're taking the feed from the feed mills out to our farms, and that is, you basically have to make twice as many trips delivering feed as you do finished product. So on finished product, the 1.3 to 1.4 billion pounds of chicken translates to 30 million pounds of chicken every day. And if you, just on average truckload size, in order to move that chicken out of the plant every day, it takes 1,000 trucks. Really, in reality, it's probably more than that because there are further processing plants. You're moving product to cold storage and back. So there are more trips than that, but just on a kind of a mass scale basis to move 30 million pounds of chicken every day, you have to have 1,000 trucks. And so that primarily right now is how product is moved around. There are many opportunities in the future. We're excited about the growth potential for the poultry industry. Again, it's not going to be dramatic growth. It's going to be steady growth. And I think 20, 30 years from now, we have a meeting like this, you'll look back and compare the size of the industry, and I think it'll be similar comparisons to 20 or 30 years ago. So thank you for what this commission is doing, looking at, and we look forward to working with you and be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Just couple from me, and then we'll open it up. Do you think that I know, because Hall County's a huge poultry market.
That's right.
Will they, and I know you're bringing in, and I know they're in Hall County, they're bringing in a great deal of grains and other things for the feed by rail. Do you think they'll use the port, the inland port there, to actually move finished product down to the port?
Well, I think it certainly will be an opportunity. One of the things, the hallmarks of the poultry industry, the way they've been successful is they have adopted new technologies, new ways of doing things when it makes business sense. And I think with moving product around, the two most important things will be predictability and knowing that when you ship product, knowing the time, the schedule, and when it will arrive, for example, in that case would be to the port. Having confidence in that predictability, and then price. I think it'll boil down to predictability and price, and they'll make decisions based on that. But the opportunity is certainly there.
And you mentioned 1,000 trucks a day. That's just to move the product that you're processing out of the plant, but that doesn't include all the trucks you're sending out to go deliver feed to the chicken houses that have all the trucks that are going to pick up the chickens at the chicken houses. So really, that number is going to be substantially higher just to be able to produce that.
Probably 3 times higher.
Yeah. So what, 1,000 to 3,000 trucks a day just in the poultry industry on our roadways.
That's right.
Other, yes, sir, Dean.
Yes, sir.
How does the rail system, how does that play into the after it comes in at the ports? Is that by truck or by rail to trucks, then to warehouse? Explain that to me.
So for rail, the main role currently for the poultry industry is bringing in the raw product, the corn and soybeans. Typically, there are cold storage facilities. So you process chicken at a poultry plant. It either leaves there and goes directly by truck to the customer, or it goes to a cold storage facility. There are a number of cold storage facilities. These are massive freezers, and there are a number of them in the poultry producing regions like Hall County, and then there are a number of them down here near the port. And so the product either goes to its customer or to a distribution center from the plant or into cold storage. If it goes into cold storage, then it can be repackaged on a refrigerated container and then brought down here by truck, typically, and to the port. So if it's going for export, it'd be repackaged there at the cold storage facility on a refrigerated container and then taken to the port.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just from a port perspective, Mike, thank you for your business. We greatly appreciate it. But I do want to point out that the Georgia ports, and working with both CSX and Norfolk Southern, when we look at these sites where we could put potential inland ports, poultry has been a major part of that decision. And it would definitely take a shift in business from the truck, I think, as you pointed out, truck to rail. But there are opportunities there, and certainly we considered that for Northeast Georgia. So when we look out into the future, we definitely see that protein and poultry moving via rail to some extent.
Absolutely.
So in the Gainesville terminal that's being expanded, would you have that opportunity perhaps with substantial amount more reefers and reefer trains directly to the
I think
port?
that is the possibility, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, there's a large cold storage facility right beside this property.
So what you're saying is Connor needs to get the pencil sharpened.
Get the
to be able
price
to earn
right.
the business
That's right.
of the chicken industry.
That's right.
Okay, good. Now we know where the problem lies, so now we got it. Any other questions?
Your refrigerated containers, are they reloaded and something shipped back? Are they deadhead back, or?
That's probably a better question. That has been a challenge, though, is making sure that the world supply is balanced. But Griffin.
That's the best question of the day. I mean, it's always the trick is to have a balanced move, and that's probably one of the challenges we'll have on any move, whether it's truck or rail. And so one of the things that Georgia Ports has been working on is try to get increased imports on refrigerated cargo, and we're being successful in that. So we're seeing produce, and if we can get that match, that'd be great. But Today, it's a lopsided number, and it's much heavier. We're happy to have the business, but a much heavier export number than imports. So we have ocean carriers are positioning empty refrigerated containers to the port to service the poultry business.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, next, one of our board members, Stephanie Smith with Home Depot, is going to present from the box retail and discuss freight logistics from their perspective. So thank you, Stephanie, for serving with us, and thank you for being here to present.
Thank you for having me. Yes, okay. Okay.
Is Will going to go next, though?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Am I not next?
We've still
Sorry, I
got,
didn't want to skip Will.
I'm skipping over, I apologize. We got so caught up in that wonderful presentation that I appreciate our friends at the Georgia Chamber keeping me straight, so.
I knew
Will,
the poultry industry was powerful, but man.
I was gonna say, he should have talked about you there a little bit.
And
so,
Abbott's not
Will.
even here.
Sorry, Stephanie.
Well, thank you, and thank you for grabbing me. I'm Will Bentley with the Georgia Agribusiness Council, and we represent all segments of the agricultural industry, from farmers to fertilizer and manufacturers and everybody in between. But I passed out a little packet of information that came from USDA regarding the Port of Savannah. If you didn't get it, I think there may be some excess ones that look like they ended up that way. But it's just some numbers to show what type of products roll through the port on an agricultural sense. But obviously in agriculture, transportation is one of the most important things to us. I don't think you could have agriculture without a good transportation system, and I don't think you could have a good transportation system without agriculture. I think they're tied together and extremely important to rural Georgia. I know that the price that our farmers can get for products, a lot of times, whether they make a profit or not, depends on what the cost of transportation is. When you're dealing with low commodity prices, transportation becomes even more important, because the mileage, the rate, what you pay the drivers, everything that goes into it could be the plus or minus on your balance sheet there every year. In agriculture and agribusiness, we really rely on three forms of transportation, like most folks: trucking, rail, and then what you see here in the overseas shipping. Rail, as Mike mentioned, is a cost-effective way in transportation, especially on some of our dry products. And I know there's looking at increased opportunities on reefer and other things there. But really, it's about moving grain from parts of the country that grow a lot of grain efficiently. Moving from the Midwest into the Southeast, where we have a lot more poultry, moving into areas where we're feeding other livestock, whether it's hogs or cattle. That's really the main use of what we're doing with railroads now, and continue to expand as those opportunities come on board and technology gets better and we get more efficient at what we do in agriculture. But rail is certainly important to all of us. And most ag products are going to touch the rail at some point, or at least have inputs that touch the rail. But overall, trucking would be our most critical segment of transportation that we use. Every single ag product, when it comes off the farm, is leaving on some type of truck and hitting the road at some point, whether it's going directly to rail or not. It's going to leave the farm on a truck, most likely. And that's why it's so important to us that we have safe and efficient and modern road systems throughout all of Georgia. We talked in the first meeting about when the bridge collapsed in Atlanta. Well, that's really important, but if a bridge would collapse in South Georgia at the right time during harvest season, I could argue that'd be just as big of an economic impact to our industry as it was to a lot of others. Now, I know a lot of y'all that sit in traffic in Atlanta probably wouldn't believe me when I say that, but that's how important these rural roads and bridges are to our industry. 70% of all agricultural tonnage is moved by trucks.
So that's something that we're always looking to improve, whether you're talking about food items, you're talking about raw materials, forest products, and other fertilizers. They're all being either taken to the farm or pulled off the farm by those trucking systems, and it's extremely important that we have an efficient way to do that. Locally, you're seeing a lot of cities that are starting to have only access to getting products by trucks, whether it's their system, the rail may not touch them, or other factors that go into it. So their only option is to get their food products that go into a grocery store or go directly into a restaurant are coming that way. So speed, reliability, predictability, and the ability to move goods that are perishable are why that's such an important thing for us. But what I really wanted to talk about too are just some of the problems that we're facing when it comes to transportation. It's like most sectors of any industry. We have those same type issues. But modern transportation allowed for a lot of specialization in agriculture. And one of the things that it caused was efficiencies in agriculture caused for there to be less need of people on those farms. Well, it's not that we don't need people in those rural areas, they're not on the farms, whether it's the cost or not being able to find people to do it. But what it's done is it's moved people out of those rural areas and more into metro areas. And then when we need those folks seasonally for trucking, it's hard to find. So we've kind of created our own issue, or that issue created the efficiencies. I'm not sure which one came first, but it's definitely an issue that we face. Is a lot of our transportation needs are heavy in the spring for planting and heavy in the fall for harvesting. When you get in the protein side, it's more year-round, but that's what it's going to be on our most of our seasonal crops, and that's one of the issues that we certainly are facing. A huge issue for us, electronic logging devices. I know anybody that moves anything on road, that's been a huge problem. A lot of you may know J. Moore Farms up in northeast Georgia in the Gainesville type area. I was speaking to him about some of the problems he faces in transportation, and that was his number one complaint, that even when he's moving products to other agritourism places in the state of Georgia, he grows a lot of pumpkins that get sold all over the state and all over the southeast. It doesn't look like that truck's moving very far, but by the time it gets loaded at his place, it goes to another place to be unloaded, goes to 2 or 3 of those more farms or agritourism places. It sits there, that meter's running, and that becomes a huge issue for him. Other producers I've talked to that sell products that are coming out of other parts of the country, they put in an order, they're waiting on, say, a load of apples from up north. Well, they can't get here because the trucker has to stop and rest because he's run out of hours of service. So that's a huge deal for us. It's, if that hits at the right time, they may lose a big weekend where they're going to make 15 or 20% of their income for the year in one big fall weekend. And if they don't have the product there, that's a huge issue for them, and something that we really would love to tackle. More of a federal issue, I believe, but certainly something that we're dealing with and trying to get different types of exemptions for agriculture, like we've done on the livestock and insect hauling, to make it where we can move those products easily. I talked a little bit about the seasonality of ag commodities. That's a huge issue for us, not having the need for these drivers year-round. You see a lot of these folks that are able to go, whether up to the Dakotas or other areas, and make over $100,000 in a short period of time driving, and that pulls them out of our areas of the state and when we need them. So competition there is a huge issue for us. That's a good thing for those drivers, but it certainly impacts what we need, because the number 2 thing I hear outside of electronic logging is finding those drivers. Folks that can pass a drug test, folks that'll show up on time, folks that'll do what they say they will do, is extremely important to us. We have a fertilizer company in the state that they had an expansion model where when they wanted to expand to a new location, they would find somebody with high management potential. They would build a location around them and let them run that new location. That's how they expand it. They've started to go to, let's find where we have 2 or 3 reliable truckers and build locations around them, and that's now their expansion model. So they're looking at what their problems are is not finding managers. They can find folks that have good management skills. They can find good salespeople, but they can't find folks that move their product. And that's going to be something that we continue to face, and I know everybody's going to face well into the future. But that's probably right there in the top of what we really need to look at. And then also something that I know is addressed. You see some of the commercials during the fall and some during the spring is safety of our farmers on the road. If you are in any rural community during planting or harvest season, you see these tractors and combines on the road, and folks get really impatient. We hear about long trains, but imagine a tractor or a traffic jam caused by a tractor going 15 miles per hour down the road. I mean, those folks aren't understanding how important it is for them to be producing food for them to eat, and they get impatient and try to pass on areas that they can't see, areas that aren't wide enough for them to pass, and we see a lot of injuries. And it seems like every year there's several really, really bad, tragic accidents that happen because of that. So that's a huge issue for us. I don't know if there's opportunities to look at, whether it's more signage in these rural areas or more awareness, but that's something that could really help our folks out. But overall, those are some of the issues that we're facing. Some of the opportunities we have are here in that paper regarding the Port of Savannah, but I do appreciate y'all giving us the time to talk a little bit about ag, and if y'all have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I think one of the things that you hit on that's important, and we talked about this when Commissioner McMurray presented, but that's how important our bridges are, in specifically rural Georgia. And I think, Commissioner, there was only 2 or 3 counties, I think, in the entire state that didn't have a bridge that needed to be replaced in the system. And I know in my own area that I represent, there are areas that trucks can no longer go on those roads, and they're having to take a long way around because of a bridge that needs to be replaced. So I think it's imperative that we continue, and we've done a good job as a state putting money into the budget every year for that. I think you hit on that. In a lot of parts of rural Georgia, that's the most important thing to that farmer to move their product, is to have a good road network and a bridge that they're able to cross that's not weight restricted. So something we've got to be very focused on, I think, as this commission and as a state, that we continue to put the dollars into the budget that we need to be able to improve our infrastructure.
Right.
Anyone else have any questions? Yes, sir.
Will, this might be a better question for Griff, but with the trade wars that we're seeing now, have we seen a noticeable decrease in our exports from ag products coming through the Port of Savannah?
I don't know about specifically to the port, but I definitely know we're feeling it on the price side. So you may be able to answer from leaving the port. But
It's safe to say that it's affected us negatively, for sure.
Do we have can you quantify that yet?
It's tough. I mean, exports we are growing slightly, but not where we thought we would be. I think we could be better than it is. Let's put it that way. It's tough to quantify, Chris.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's been in a bad ag economy, that was really the last thing we wanted to see, especially with the storms that came through and the problems we're facing in rural Georgia. So it's we'd love to see that fixed.
Senator Gooch.
Yeah, I want to follow up on something you talked about, Will, with the e-logs. I've begun learning a little bit more about that. Apparently, we're using electronic logs in all of our trucks now, if a truck is after a certain age. But I understand there may be some exemptions for local hauling. Are you familiar with that, and can you tell everyone what those are?
There are some exemptions under 150 air miles that have been helpful. And they do allow for you to get a few more hours and things along those lines, but
You're still limited to 14 hours, is that correct?
Right. And we understand the safety issues that go along with that, and we're not looking to see folks on the road 24 hours straight. But when you look at, especially when you're dealing with fruit and vegetables that do have a certain time that they're edible, when you look at cattle and other proteins, it becomes an animal safety issue. When Georgia specifically, most of the processing facilities for beef would be in the Midwest or Texas in that area. So they're having to drive. I think the closest one they can get to from middle or South Georgia would be 26 hours away or something along those lines. So it's just not a real feasible thing for them to stop on the side of the road when you've got a load of steers on the back of a trailer, especially in the middle of the summer if you're going to Texas.
Sure. Another different topic. and maybe when Mike was up there, I should have asked him about this. The issue of ethanol in our fuel tends to increase the cost of petroleum for all of our industries. And I don't know how much corn we produce here in Georgia a year, but I know other states are benefiting from that greatly. Have you looked at that as an organization to form an opinion? I'd love to hear that discussion someday. Maybe it's not today, but it seems like we're inflating the cost of gasoline when we don't necessarily have to.
I mean, I would agree that ethanol certainly made some changes to the corn market, but I'll let Mike touch on that there.
The ethanol mandate hasn't been our favorite program in our industry beyond just the price on petroleum or the gas products. It's a major buyer of corn and competes with our industry. About 40% of corn now is used in ethanol market. The biggest concern we have, though, is when there is a drought. The problem we have in our industry, it's hard for us to deal with volatility of corn prices. Corn prices go up and down, but if they're slow and predictable, we can adjust. It's when we have a drought like we did in 2012 and 2008, and the mandates that go along with ethanol drives all the product into ethanol production, and then you suddenly have a smaller supply because of a drought. Then that's when the price really spikes, and that's what hurts us the most.
And if you know this, maybe you can give us a quick answer. How much of the corn that you use for your chicken feed comes from Georgia versus being imported from out of state?
I don't know the percentage of that, but it's really kind of regional. There are feed mills in southwest Georgia that buy as much corn as they can. Camilla, for example, Oglethorpe, the plants in southeast Georgia, southwest and southeast Georgia, Douglas, where there is a row crop around it. In North Georgia, there's really not much of a local market or supply. But it's feed mills typically buy as much local as they can.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to echo a few things Will said. Obviously, in your comment on bridges, 1,551 need to be replaced. So with a conversation previously about building bridges over railroads, there's still a backlog of just good, safe condition of bridges that we need to continue to focus on. The electronic truck logs is a national interest, and I know the USDOT, I think, is working on that, especially in and around the time of that where the driver is just being loaded or offloaded, and that dead time when they're not driving. We need to keep a watch on that at the national level. I mean, that's very critical, but that translates back into truck parking, and that's one of the things I think this commission needs to continue to look on, whether it's, where it's perishable goods, ag business, or containers. That truck parking is a real issue, especially to local communities. Cities and counties are especially affected with that. There's some new technology in that market, and I think there's some things going on nationally that we could learn and leverage as well. The other thing I just want to highlight that Will mentioned was the equipment moving down the roadway from a safety point of view, but I think this is maybe still in some of Dave's thoughts here, but that equipment is larger and heavier than it's ever been. So just the infrastructure itself of a rural road was never designed or built to accommodate the equipment that we're seeing today. So that's just basic investment again, and I see many counties coming in saying we need help just again paving our roads and trying to patch them and keep them held together because of the agribusiness, and it's not, they're there because there's a true need, and as good as LMIG has been and as great as that's been, there's still a big need just in the basics of roads and bridges that help support our #1 economy.
And I would say the movement of that equipment is probably going to increase because you're seeing a lot more farms and farmers having to lease land as opposed to owning it outright, which means it's probably further spread out than it has been when you traditionally had a farmstead right around your house. They're having to go further to find the land to farm. So I think you'll probably see more of that equipment on the road. So I do think that'd be a wise investment.
Commissioner, I'd just like to say that we were briefed by ARC on parking, truck parking. Chairman Tanner and I were, 3 weeks ago, a month ago? It is a problem. They're parking on the side of the roads and on exits and interchanges and so on, because they have to stop because of those regulations. So we do need to really look at that. And Chairman Tanner and I have been talking about maybe creating a subcommittee just to look at parking, truck parking, because there's a huge shortage for that, so.
Yeah, and just following up, I know Chairman Beach mentioned ARC is going to do a presentation to us at the next meeting on that, but yeah, talking with Commissioner McMurray and others, this is a national problem. It's not just happening in Georgia, and I'm not sure that anybody solved that riddle of how to fix that, but something we definitely need to work on. So, any other questions? All right, thank you. Sorry I missed you earlier too. You did a great job. All right. Now, Stephanie Smith with Home Depot. The other was just a practice run for you. This is the real deal. You're on.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me as well. I will start by saying I am not the foremost expert on ports and imports at Home Depot, but I've been briefed and I will do my best to answer questions. If there's anything that comes up, I can always go back and answer it at a later date. So most of you are familiar with Home Depot. We're a $100 billion plus retailer based in Atlanta, Georgia. From an import perspective, we employ a four-corner strategy. We service 2,000 stores in the United States and then about another 500 in Mexico and Canada. So we've got about 2,500 stores total. So for import product, we bring in product in 4 locations nationally: Seattle, LA, Long Beach, New York, New Jersey, and Savannah. So Savannah for us, the Georgia Port Authority has been a long-standing strategic partner for Home Depot. Savannah is located in an excellent place to service the South. We service about 650 stores from the Savannah port, and it's about 22% of all of our imports coming through Savannah. It's our second largest. LA Long Beach is the largest, then Savannah is the second largest. So we service from there 11 different Home Depot distribution centers. We have distribution centers that support the stores directly, and then we also have some e-commerce distribution centers as well that we service from the port. About 25% of what comes in from the Savannah port for us is intermodal, and about 75% goes out on trucks. So that's how the breakdown works. And then we are partners with 7 ocean carriers. All of them call in Savannah. That's kind of the lay of the land for us. When we're looking across the industry, yes, sir.
Is there a way that, do y'all have a plan to try to get that product more on rail from that 25% number, or is it because of time or?
A lot, yes. I would say we evaluate every year, and we would like to put as much as we can as possible on rail. And I think as the density of rail just increases in general, we'll be able to put more and more. But a lot of it goes back to consistency and speed. So, and the speed with which we need the product. Okay, so that's sort of the Home Depot perspective. As we sort of look across the industry and different things that we're seeing right now, we get asked a lot about the tariffs and sourcing. I think that's come up a few times today in here. Generally, it is driving uncertainty and incremental costs across all the shipper supply chains. We are seeing that. Freight volume out of China, as you would expect, is going down. Southeast Asia is growing. I believe that was mentioned yesterday as well. We are seeing that a lot of our suppliers are leaving China and moving towards Southeast Asia. One of the problems that we're seeing with that, though, is because China has been a source for so long, there is a very established infrastructure within China, and Southeast Asia doesn't necessarily have that. So there is a lot of congestion happening upstream in those locations before things even get onto the water and over to the port, which is lengthening our supply chain, which is an issue. So that's sort of where we are with tariffs and sourcing. From a maritime perspective, 2018 was a little bit rough for most of the international carriers, the shippers, the owners of the boats. This year has been a lot better for them, so they've done a much better job of managing available inventory and making sure that they're pulling boats that are not needed, which is actually a really good thing for us. We want to make sure that they're making money so that we have a healthy ecosystem across the shippers. From the one other thing that's kind of happened, and I don't know if this has been mentioned or not yet in this forum, There is, the International Maritime Organization has put a new requirement in 2020 that all of the ships are going to have to use a new type of fuel with less sulfur emissions. And so that is going to significantly increase cost from a fuel perspective, shipping internationally. So it's expected to projected to increase carrier costs by $10 billion to $15 billion, which could have some impacts as well across the organization. And then from a port and dray perspective, we went and saw the port yesterday. Dray capacity also had a difficult 2018. It seems like things are normalizing. There is something that we are watching, not sure if you guys are aware, but there's been a lot of new legislation in California around owner-operators becoming more like employees and potentially impacting the companies that employ a lot of truckers, as well as the folks who do the draying today are all owner-operators. So as that shifts, it puts more pressure on the companies that are actually running those owner-operators in terms of liability, insurance, things like that. So we're just watching that, because if there is a major impact on the industry, that could impact us significantly. And then the other thing from a port and dray perspective, and just generally across all of the import world, it has historically been a very manual, disconnected process from a technology and a visibility perspective. There are a lot of new third-party companies that are emerging to try and work on that. Brand new companies like eDray is one that's recently started to try and help with end-to-end visibility. And then larger companies like Maersk are starting up their own. They've started something called Maersk Accelerate, which is supposed to provide visibility across as well. But that's something that we're continuing to watch and looking forward to, because it has been difficult to really understand exactly where our product is and track it throughout the entire process end to end. And then, as we saw yesterday, the ports are doing a nice job continuing to expand their appointment systems, the peel-off pile options, and really gaining operational efficiencies. And one thing I will say is Savannah really is viewed across the whole industry, and definitely with our carriers, as a best-in-class industry model. Definitely the best port that we work with day in, day out, and is just a great asset to Georgia. So when we look at what are the biggest challenges in general across the U.S. with ports, and what are the constraints that drive our business, predictable freight flow. So again, that visibility end to end and really understanding, but speed is very important, but almost more important is predictability. So if we know exactly how long it's going to take to get off of a boat in the stackyard over to the dray and then out, is very important for us. That determines how much inventory we need to hold. And if it's high variability, it's much, much more inventory in all our distribution centers. So the more we can make those consistent, and then I mentioned technology really driving visibility specifically and consistency across that entire chain. And then has historically been an issue, but chassis supply, it's gotten better over the past year, but chassis supply and efficiency is needed there as well. So this really is the areas we would say from a port perspective that most need investment. So visibility, improved data availability, reliability across the entire business, to really reduce that variability and help us manage our inventory end to end. Collaboration, there are a lot of different folks that are involved in the entire process, from ocean carriers to the terminal managers to the truckers, and then to the dray folks as well. I would say Savannah does one of the best jobs of all the four ports that we work with at that collaboration, and really does a nice job across the board. And then as much as we can advance the operational efficiency and try and improve speed, which I think you guys are doing a lot of great things around that as well. So overall, I guess what I would say is, we think that the port is fantastic for Georgia. It's a huge asset. It's something that we need to continue to nourish and make sure that we're supporting. I actually think the major issues are not specifically with the port, but as we've discussed, more with the congestion that it's going to drive in the rest of the state. So along with the population growth, and also just the growth in e-commerce and delivery across all of the Southeast, I think this is a major driver for that as well. So if we're going to look at something to invest in, really the congestion is where we would lead. So that is what I've got. Do you guys have any questions?
Yes, sir.
Stephanie, on the, I presume your technical systems are point of sale at a store can drive the supply chain back here on the origin points, so you know by lane how much volume is occurring and by mode.
We do.
So that could be helpful in thinking that how we help that even more efficiently with the infrastructures.
Right.
And then secondly, of the 11 distribution centers,
Yes.
how many are rail served at this moment? Because I've seen real effective hub and intermodal hubs tied to major distribution centers and how they become tremendous machines. Just curious.
Right. So generally, we have 4 different types of distribution centers. So we have 3 different types that service our stores, and then we have e-commerce facilities. On the types that service our stores, it's 3 different kind of ways. One is what we call our bulk distribution centers. And those, if you walk into a Home Depot store, everything that's on the left side of the store, so lumber, drywall, roofing, shingles, we have rail that goes directly into those facilities. And we unload in those facilities directly off the rail. So lumber, that type of product comes directly off. We have, I think of the 8, 3 of those in the South. 3 of the 8 are that type of facility. We also have a very domestic-focused facility where we flow product that comes domestically on trucks and goes straight out. And then the third type is our import stocking facility. We do not have rail that goes directly into those facilities, but what we do use intermodal quite frequently for those facilities, where we will come off the port, put something onto a train, go, and then it gets transferred to a truck to go into the facility.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yesterday, when I spoke, I talked about the many customers of the Georgia ports, and we said there are different types of customers. We have the ocean carrier that we have a financial relationship with, and then the beneficial cargo owner, and Home Depot is a perfect example of that, where we are working together often with our respective teams, and some of our folks are here, and Stephanie identified peel-off piles. How can we do things more efficiently directly for Home Depot, even though our relationship is not set up that way? But at the end of the day, I can tell you Home Depot is extremely focused on velocity of cargo through the supply chain, and they're certainly an industry leader, and the results prove in their numbers as well. So thank you for your support of the ports.
And I think you mentioned this, and we've heard this over and over, that where folks used to keep a tremendous amount of inventory, that's no longer the case. They want to keep the least amount that you can
Absolutely.
in your warehouses, and that makes the supply chain even more important for us to have good road network support to be efficient, so that you're not keeping the inventory.
What we would honestly like to do with our import freight, we do have the stocking facilities where we stock import freight, but the best flow for us is to come straight off the port. We go to a local transload facility that unloads containers, figures out where things are going to go, goes directly to our flow facility, and then flows out to the store without stopping or being stocked once.
Yeah. And I think that's industry-wide.
Right.
That's what everyone's shooting for.
Right.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you
Okay.
for the presentation. Thank you
Yes.
for the service with the commission. All right. Next up, another customer of the port, Kevin Kinsey with Kia, talking about Georgia Port's utilization. Kia has been a tremendous partner to our state and tremendous economic driver for the southwest part of our state. So thank you for all you do, and I've owned a Kia and a great product. While we're getting that geared up, in case I forget at the end, I just want to thank our staff too, that's here today. They've done a tremendous job. They always do a tremendous job for us. I'm not going to start naming them individually, but just appreciate all the hard work the House and the Senate staff give to the legislators and to this commission. So if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be able to make this possible, so thank you.
All right, good afternoon, or I guess it's still morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kevin Kinsey. I'm here for Kia today. We'll go over a couple of items, and one of the advantages of going toward the end is a lot of what I have to present has been discussed already. So I may glean through some of this a little more quickly today in lieu of time, knowing that we're a little behind in our schedule. So a little bit about me. I'm the Senior Manager of Procurement for the Kia plant in West Point, Georgia. Been on automotive my entire career, almost 30 years now, previously with the Honda Group, and a couple of suppliers in between. I also want to talk about Kia a little bit. I realized last night that many people know we're here, but they don't know much about us. So we have a couple of great milestones this year that we're very proud of, and the ports have helped us achieve these. First off, we're going to be 10 years old this year. In November, as you can see on the slide there, we started production in November of 2009. This year we'll be 10 years old in production. We also just produced our 3 millionth vehicle here in the U.S., a Kia Telluride that will stay here in the U.S. for sales. As you can see, our size, we're about 2,200 acres, our pad is about 650 acres in total, with our total investment of about $1.1 billion to date. And then we produce about 340,000 vehicles per year. We've been up to 370,000 vehicles a few years ago when the market was good. But with the changes we've seen over the past couple of years, we're currently at about 300,000 with plans to get back to that number in the very near future. Again, everybody doesn't always connotate Kia with quality. And we've done a really good job here in the state of Georgia and bringing a lot of realization to people that Kia has been ranked the #1 mass market brand for 5 years in a row. That's beating the likes of my old employer, Toyota, and others. So we're very, very proud of that fact and proud of our vehicles, and I appreciate your comments about your Kia. We've also won Consumer Reports a number of years and also have 5-star ratings across our vehicles. So with that, we do a lot here in North America. As you can see, we have the West Point plant. We have sales and distribution out in California and up in Canada. We have our DC office, of course, R&D in Michigan, and we have a second plant down in Mexico. We build the Telluride, the Sorento, and the Optima here in Georgia, and then we build the smaller vehicles down in Mexico, the Accent, Rio, and Forte. And the reason I bring that up is they ship into the Port of Georgia for this area. So they don't use trains, they load them and bring them in by boat. A little bit about our supply base as well, because this means a lot. We've been growing our supply base year over year. With the new CTPAT, with all of the new USMCA regulations, we're continuing to localize and grow. By next year, we'll have an additional 18 suppliers. Actually, that number changed. At the end of last week, we're up to about 24 new suppliers coming on board for new models we're launching next year. And we're continuing to add on and grow our supply base. And with that growth comes more trucks, more rail use, et cetera. And then this is our supply base just between ourselves in West Point, Georgia, and the Hyundai plant down in Montgomery. We share a lot of suppliers. And we have about 50 suppliers located between us and around us that comprise close to 75% of our total spend. And almost all of these suppliers also use the port to bring their components in from Korea, China, and their global supply bases. So how do we utilize the ports? Briefly, we partner very well with Griff and his team to bring in our KD parts, as we call them, knockdown parts. We had over 20,000 containers last year brought in, and this is just for Kia. It's about double that when you account for all of our suppliers as well. And then this year we're already on track at 22,500 containers to date. So we'll probably be at over 30,000 when all is said and done. So we're very proud of that relationship. Of course, we have the Port of Brunswick that we use for export. As many of you asked last night, is that our ship out there? It is a Hyundai Glovis ship, yes. And yes, we had product on it, unfortunately. But We just started the Kia Telluride export to the GCC countries, which is the Gulf Coast communities of Iraq, Iran, that area. We also, as I mentioned, bring in vehicles from Korea as well as from Mexico into the Port of Brunswick as well. So to the tune of currently about 60,000 vehicles imported overall and just about 2,000 exported. So we're really trying to grow, and I mentioned our production is low right now compared to our capacity. So there's a huge opportunity there for us to grow our capacity to export more vehicles. And then, of course, our partnership with GPA. Everybody said it today, the superior support and customer service we get from them, the strong relationship they have with Customs Border Patrol helps us, and of course, all of the freight options we have coming out of the port really does help support our business. So what we see happening in Georgia and across the U.S. To and from our ports, we see a lot of growth and expansion as has been discussed. We've also discussed the uncertainty and risk, the increased collaboration we continue to see, and the strong customer relationships, and I'll try to touch on some of these just briefly. So what we see happening in Georgia and across the U.S. To and from the ports is that growth and expansion that many of us have already talked about today. The harbor expansions and deepening to accept the larger ships, the more inland ports to help address the traffic concerns in and around the ports themselves, and of course the growth. And it says it all. Everything you've said in the address last week and now the growth here in Savannah has been amazing. And we're happy to be part of that. But then what we also see is uncertainty. We've talked about the trade issues and tariffs that have been created, causing the uncertainties of late. This can impact both the import and export sides. Trucking, that is our biggest problem right now. Finding good drivers, qualified drivers. We had the presentation yesterday about age. That was new to me. But the e-logs are impacting, and we are over 5 hours away, and that's by car. If you factor in by truck, it really can create some efficiencies issues, bringing in the containers from the port. We've worked on some solutions in the past, but we continue to work with the port to find better solutions for us. Of course, the capacity adjustments in the key sectors with carriers, I think Stephanie mentioned, we see a lot of alignment with the smaller companies being absorbed by larger companies. We also have this new fuel cost initiative coming up that will increase all of our costs per TEU. So there's a lot changing that we need to be prepared for. Of course, collaboration between the ports to help address some of these challenges. We see the environmental programs that was mentioned yesterday on our tour, where they're trying to address the impacts the ports are having on the air and water around them. And the natural resources, the infrastructure changes that are seeing, the partnerships that we're seeing. We do ship through the ports of LA and Long Beach. They work well with us as well. We train parts in there. We also team truck parts over just because of their proximity to Asia. Sometimes it's a little faster when we're in the need of parts. And then, of course, we have the whole cybersecurity issue right now, which I don't think anybody's really mentioned, and that's not something we should take lightly. So the establishing of this risk management teams and policies in these areas, we've been impacted by cyber issues from other ports in the past, so we really need to continue our focus there because it will affect all of us. So what are our overall challenges to and from the ports? As I just mentioned, security. Ports of Savannah do a great job for us. We have no concerns there whatsoever. But some interesting facts we've found is, there's going to be a need to spend over $4 billion over the next 10 years to improve security in the ports in general. 2/3 of that around maintenance and upgrades, and 1/3 of that just to ensure that nobody hacks into the systems and starts sending my parts to somebody else and containers to different areas. There was a good quote that said, "Protecting our nation's seaports against terrorism and other security threats helps ensure safe and reliable goods movement, which is critical to our economy." And that affects all methods of transportation in the ports as well. And that was by CEO Kurt Nagel. Going then to logistics, adapting to the new super ships that to remain competitive. That's been discussed enough. I won't go there. But also, just the sheer number of containers coming in on a vessel, meaning we all need a larger footprint. And then poor schedule reliability and visibility. I think Stephanie touched on this a little bit as well. You know, we see concerns. We need to be able to see where our parts are at all times. And global schedule reliability stands at about 82%, with only 2 of the 15 carriers coming into the ports above 90%. And that can impact us. We try to run a JIT operation. And so what that means is we have to have more containers. We have to hold more parts to account for those delays. So we were asked to talk about how we feel transit can be improved, and there's really 3 items that we want to talk about, and that's the alignment of our goals with our service providers through schedule clarification, data interpretation, and clear customer service expectations. Again, working with the ports is amazing in all of these areas, but there's always room for improvement. The second item is improving the intermodal innovation, using inland ports to improve trucking and reduce driver risks. And we've talked about that today with the north side with the new inland ports going up there. And we've been observing these inland port operations in North Georgia and the advantages that they have. And would like to be part of that with a West Georgia inland port strategy in the future. There's a lot around. Not only are our containers, but we have Walmart distribution centers within 2 of them that within 30 miles each direction of our plant, as well as all of the other business, whether it be poultry or whatever, that we would love to see some expansion there. And then, of course, the expansion of the dedicated lanes that drivers use to move freight in and out of the high traffic areas like Atlanta. That only helps. You know, right now with all the trucks on the road, whatever we can do to separate the trucks from the cars, give them clearer ways to get through these major metropolitan areas will only help all of us. So in conclusion, then, you know, we're seeing a lot of change right now in the freight industry. While we see growth and expansion at the ports, we also see uncertainty and risk. Trade disputes, driver shortages, rising costs. We're all in this together and impacted by it all. So from our side, we're blessed with a great partner in the Georgia ports. GPA has been an important partner of Kia's from day one, providing us with unsurpassed support and flexibility. Yesterday on the tour, they talked about bringing our large presses in when we first opened, only being able to drive at night. These are rigs that had about 100 tires on them, trying to bring those large presses in for us to run our vehicles. And you know, that was all made possible through logistics, the Georgia Port Authority, and good collaboration. But again, and flexibility. So we thank everybody for your time today, and I'll open the floor to any questions.
Thank you. You know, you hit on something I think we hear a lot about too is driver shortage. And I know that's a problem that folks up Airway face in North Georgia, is being able to find good qualified drivers to drive commercial vehicles. I don't know that there's an answer to that problem, but that's something we've got to focus on as we look at creating job opportunities for folks. It's a big problem.
It is. We bring in close to 700 trucks a day into the facility with parts. And, you know, each of those needs a driver. And that doesn't include what comes from the port. And it's a shortage for us.
So 700 a day come in to your facility at West Point with parts?
That's correct.
How many go out, do you know?
Well, we ship vehicles by rail and truck. Mm-hmm. So by rail over to the West Coast, partnered with CSX. Outbound, I don't know the numbers. I focus on inbound, being the purchasing manager, but I can definitely get the numbers for you if you'd like.
It's just, it's amazing how quickly those numbers add up when you think about 1,000 plus trucks a day in the poultry industry, 1,000 trucks just
at least
in and out of the West Point facility. It's a lot of vehicles moving across state highways just for 2 industries there. So.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I wrote down as a takeaway from here, because I've heard it several times before, just on the issue about not having enough truck drivers. So is it a location-based issue? Is it truck drivers that are here at the port, or can they be elsewhere? Just truck drivers overall? And then my other question was, isn't there some sort of industry that deals with, or industry trade group that deals with truck drivers, and is this on their radar where they're attempting to hire people?
So from my perspective, we have a number of truck driving schools located around us.
Right.
Unfortunately, one that was in the Auburn-Opelika area was in the news because they were kind of fudging their records because there's such a demand. They were trying to get these drivers out quickly. But there is a shortage nationwide. Previously, when I was with Honda, that's up in the Midwest, the same issues haunt them as well. So we have dedicated fleets and we have dedicated carriers, but I've always got shipments coming in late, and when I'm running an hour of inventory and I don't have a driver to bring in that next truck, it's critical for me.
So enhancing the number of drivers, whether it's company specific or individuals, just truckers, period.
For us, yes.
And somehow it will help you.
And some of the regulations that are coming, the e-logs and other things that limit drivers and their ability to drive, certain times and distances. Again, I'm not the transportation expert. I'm a purchasing guy.
Yeah.
There's smarter minds than
No,
mine
I've
in
heard
here
it
that can
several
answer
times.
that.
I
but,
was just
yeah,
curious.
I just know the impacts are pretty severe.
And I guess I asked the chair, I don't know, is there an industry or a trade group or something that represents, well, I know we have unions and that kind of thing, people that represent the truckers, and do we know, or maybe should have them come in and talk about how they're looking to meet this workforce demand?
There is an association. They'll actually be at our Dalton meeting.
Okay.
And they'll talk about some of these issues, both the parking issue and the issue around just trying to develop a workforce. And I will tell you that our technical college system has several driving schools. In our technical college, the new Oakwood, or the new campus that was built up in Hall County by Lanier Tech, they have a commercial operator course there and a program, and I know there's other campuses across the state that do that, but I think it just mirrors what's going on in trade in general across the state. We have a huge shortage of all tradesmen, whether it's truck drivers or heat and air, plumbing, and that's going to continue to get worse, and it's going to be a real issue for our state, and we're going to have to continue to find ways to encourage young people and others to go into those types of industries. Yeah, that's right. And if they go through our technical college, it's 100% paid. It's one of the 13 or so that we have identified that are important to our state, so we pay 100% of the tuition. So if someone wants to go to one of our technical schools and comes out as a certified CDL driver and ready to go to work, the opportunity is there. And it's a good paying position. Again, these are high paying jobs that they can work and go into many different types of fields. So.
Well, offline, I'd like to get more information about that, because I think it needs to be shared with the community. I think people are looking for jobs and maybe not knowing where they're most needed. So if you can get me some more information, I'd like to promote it.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to speak with you a little bit afterwards. I'm Ed Kroll with the Georgia Motor Trucking Association.
Okay.
And as the chairman said, there'll be a presentation about a lot of that at the next meeting.
Okay.
But we can talk a little after this, too.
Sure, thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might, some folk may not be familiar. You've heard the term ELD a couple of times in here, which stands for Electronic Logging Device. And just briefly, so you understand, the electronic logging devices became mandatory at the end of last year. They are not new regulations. What they are is an exact measurement of existing regulations. The hours of service did not change. They always were what they were. What the ELDs have done is they've taken the fudge factor out of the industry. And so a trucker used to drive an extra 20 minutes to get that load delivered to the customer. They can't drive the extra 20 minutes anymore. So the entire industry is coming up short, because trucking used to kind of bend the rules. Sometimes it really bent the rules, but it would get the job done for the customer and figure out the paperwork later. It can't do that anymore. So truckers when they're out of hours, and they have to stop where they have to stop, which is also why parking's becoming a much bigger problem. So a lot of these things just kind of cascade on each other. But just so folk understand, there weren't any regulation changes. It's just a matter of being more exact in the efficiency and in the ability of the industry to serve the customers.
And I know ARC will bring this up at our next meeting when they present, but there's some studies about the length of time it takes a driver in the Atlanta market to find a parking space, and that's around an hour. So the driver, that extra 20 minutes they used to have, now they're having to subtract that plus that extra hour just because there's no place for them to park. So they're driving around looking for a place to get their rest hours. So it's a real issue. It seems like a simple problem that's developing into a more serious problem that affects the supply chain. So, yeah.
Thought I would just have is, I would agree. We hear from all of our drivers and all of our carriers, their number one issue is the shortage of truck drivers. I do think it's sort of driving the autonomous vehicle industry, though. And one thought we probably need to think about in the future is Georgia going to be ready for freight movement via autonomous vehicle, and how do we feel about that?
Commissioner McMurray.
Great segue, Stephanie. Thank you. I was just going to highlight that we've actually are underway with a pilot project along I-85 to deploy cellular to vehicle technology. And so we're trying to be ready for that level of autonomy, for safety, for efficiency. The repeated theme today has been predictability from the logistics industry. So we're excited about deploying a very new technology along 85, and again, really more of a freight focused. We're already deploying, we'll have up to 1,700 signals in Metro Atlanta using a different technology that gives cars and drivers, including, we talked to Derek yesterday, UPS is on board with this too, that you get in-cab notices of what speed you need to maintain to get through signals on green, or if the signal, it gives you a countdown to when the signal is going to go to yellow and red for safety, and then also the potential for pedestrians pushing crosswalk buttons. You'll get a note that somebody's trying to cross the street. So a lot of it's a lot of safety. Number one is that's why our first mission is always safety, but number two is there's a lot of opportunity for increased efficiency of not stopping and starting, and which pays dividends in movement of freight. And so we're excited about that. It will be something emerging. We're going to have some more conversations with Kia and really getting those 700 trucks engaged again to benefit, so we get a good data set of a very different setting of a rural interstate to a major manufacturing facility, which is much different than Atlanta with a lot of traffic and more for personal mobility. So we're excited about that, being ready for that. And then I guess you mentioned dedicated lanes for trucks as well, and that's one of our initiatives on I-75 is to be ready from a safety point of view for moving freight away from passenger cars, but also be ready for technology, for platooning opportunities, which will be a much more safe environment when 3 or 4 tractor trailers are somewhat nose to tail, and you're not having to drive next to them or try to pass them on the interstate. So those are some of the things we're contemplating to move ahead. And then I guess finally, Mr. Chairman, I asked Kevin, out of those 700 trucks in and out, I remember some number that the inventory you have in the plant itself was 3 or 4 hours. I can't remember the right number. Is that about right?
If I were to average my just-in-time inventory with my bulk shipments from my suppliers, it would be about 3 or 4 hours. But for like seeding, my seed plants are within 10 miles of my facility. We're talking minutes. Yeah, about 40 to 55 minutes per trailer.
And that's why I remember that, and I just want to make sure we highlighted that, because again, that predictability, even such things as a crash on the interstate has a real impact. And so we have to think about the operational nature, not just pure infrastructure, but how do we operationalize everything we do not to have impacts like that.
Yeah, and even the impacts like that in construction. We have a lot of construction on the 85 corridor down there right now between both Alabama and Georgia. The difference is Alabama is doing all their construction at night. So that allows my trucks to get through much more easily because it's reduced traffic time for vehicles. We're not doing it here in Georgia. It's during the days, and it has shut me down a few times now. But everything like that, we don't have a lot of extra routes that we can go except the highway because we're very rural. And some of them have turns, 90-degree turns that the truck drivers just can't get through. So I can't route a truck off the highway through West Point City, Georgia, to turn to get into my facility. They just can't make it. So I'm very constricted by the highway. And when there's issues there, it definitely has the ability to impact us.
And just one note on the working during the day, that was a strategic decision that the duration of the project was, I think, less than half by working around the clock versus all-night work. So there was some trade-offs, but sorry for that impact. We are strategic in our thought. Maybe not get it right every time, though.
We've worked around it, so.
Yes, sir.
Kevin, I heard you talk last night that you're bringing in a tremendous amount of containers. I can't quite remember the number, but your containers plus those 2 Walmart centers, plus your competitor down the road in Alabama, is there a need for an inland terminal that can be rail served?
Yes. I mean, I have no problem. You know, we've been working with the Georgia Port Authority to identify land and working collaboratively with Troup County, Meriwether County and CSX to identify the possibility of a inland port closer to us.
How many containers do you handle?
So for me, it's going to be about 30,000 this year. When you bring in the suppliers, we're probably talking anywhere from 50 to 60,000.
Wow.
Yeah, on the port side of it, we've been in very close communication with Kia. I think there's 3 areas where we think inland ports would be well served for the state, and that is where we have one in northwest Georgia, northeast Georgia, and then in central west Georgia. So we're looking at that. We only have so much capital. We have to plan these projects, and we've got a long-term plan to do those things. And I think this is where the Freight Commission comes in. Funding is key, so we can talk about that as we go through this process.
Any other questions today?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Next up, we've heard from some large companies, but our small businesses drive much of our economy here in Georgia, and ship and carry freight all across our state. But from a small business perspective, Rural Joiner with 24 E-Style is here, and appreciate you being here with us. Look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Chairman Tanner and Chairman Beach, along with Senator Gooch and members of the Freight Logistics Commission Board. I want to thank y'all for your time. I won't be redundant with a lot that has been gone over, but we're a small family business that probably about 5, maybe 7 years ago, we started reading the writing on the wall was that, we could either begin to differentiate what we were doing and grow it in a way, especially being in a city. We're from Savannah, Georgia. We have 14 million visitors that come through our street per day. And I saw that as we were putting things on our floor and we were sort of showing as a showroom for other folks to come in, sit on it, then they go home from wherever they were from and then either purchase it from them or find it online. And, we figured out that we need to come up with our own differentiated product that was original to us, had a value, and would speak to that customer. So no matter where they were from, they would end up, they could go back online, they could research it, whatever, it would lead back to us. We're differentiated in a way that we have some furniture that's like, we sell chairs that are made out of old airplane parts. It's a $9,000 chair, to a swing bed that's made of acacia that's $1,500, which is actually our best product that we sell. Georgia Ports gave us that global reach to be able to actually go and find these manufacturers. Since we're not necessarily in the manufacturing business ourselves, we do some of these specialized products, but Georgia Ports was the way that gave us that door to the globe. It then made it to where we could differentiate ourselves and also create other revenue channels, so we would have enough margin in between selling to an end user, to a wholesaler, to people that are doing projects from commercial to hotels, whatever. And it gave us a global reach. This is what I think we're seeing throughout the ecosystem of what's going on with small business today. You're either evolving or you're going to get left behind. You know, many times I've gone and I've spoke to people that are also retailers, whether it's the Atlanta market or whatever. They would ask me, well, what do you do about Amazon? How do you deal with Amazon? And, you know, I would tell them, I don't. You know, I will not go into a gunfight with a knife. I come up with my own product, and I give you a good value, and we ship it to you quickly. And so, like, even when we would go to the Atlanta market, everything that we would have in there that we would sell to other furniture stores, designers, or whatever, we would have it in stock, ready to ship, so it would be on their door within 2 weeks. This is what I'm seeing throughout small business, and what I think with most people that are understanding what's going on with the tectonic plates, with how we consume things, how we're doing it from retail to wholesale. This is the deal. Even traditional marketing is not working anymore. It's going to social media, Instagram, YouTube. Anybody with a phone now can have a business and a website. So to not delve into many of the things which, you know, I heard from Kia and especially Home Depot, or some of the logistics issues, you know, it's amazing to me that actually I'm even standing up here testifying in front of y'all with a company like Home Depot. I mean, they're the benchmark. You know, their story is what all small business sort of strives to be. Maybe not as big as them, but small is the new big. And, you know, it's amazing to me, too, especially with Georgia Ports and the asset that we have there. Those folks, they treat me like Home Depot. We don't move as many, you know, boxes, nowhere near it, but, you know, I call up Lee, or I call up Griff or Jamie or anyone. They're there for us, and they actually, you know, they sort of gave me the, not everybody is as crazy as I am, to where I just hopped on a plane and went to China and India and found these manufacturers that we started bringing stuff back from. But these guys, you know, if I had an issue or if there were questions about what if, I could get them on the phone and I could leverage that resource, and they really have. They treated me like family. I do think that there is one issue that we sort of, you know, we've not tiptoed around, but not looked into, as to what is a problem for logistics and for small business and for business in Georgia as well, even large business. It's this inventory tax. I'm on the Georgians First Commission, and I hear time in and time out about this inventory tax. You know, I hear about the just-in-time manufacturing and how they're trying to flow these containers to make sure that they're getting all the product they need. They're not buying overage, because on December 31st, unless you have went and negotiated a free port, you're going to be paying a tax on that. You don't do that in South Carolina, you don't do that in Florida, but you do it in Georgia. I have small business neighbors that I know, whether they're in the jewelry business or whatever it is, they take their inventory and they take it out of the state December 31st, so January 1, they're not taxed on it. I also know long-standing businesses that have been in Savannah, multi-generational family businesses that have left and went over to South Carolina because they just don't want to deal with that inventory tax. You know, whether it's been the state chamber or smaller local chambers that have worked and talked about this, we've not been able to move the needle. We talk about these free ports, and I think the free ports allow, you know, certain businesses that are able to navigate that to see those advantages. But if you're brick and mortar and you don't have somebody there in order to negotiate that for you, you're stuck with it. So what does that do to the average business? Let's say if you're in the furniture business and you have a Wayfair or another company that comes to a certain county, they get a free port. I don't know if it's 4 or 5. They get that exemption. That not only, and that's wonderful for them. Trust me, I'm not downing that at all. But what do you do in order to fortify that small business that's brick and mortar, that is not only paying those property taxes, has been taking the slings and arrows, but now they're going to be levied with an inventory tax? So that's what I came here to tell you, and I am so excited to be here. I love being in Georgia and testifying in front of you guys. This is the coolest. Y'all have a great day.
Let's see, is there any questions? All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for all you do.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Chris, can you touch a little bit on this inventory tax and talk about what y'all are doing at the Georgia Chamber?
Mr. Chairman, I was just making a note that I got to follow up with the rule and get a little more detail on it. We've been focused on trying to get all of our communities to pass Freeport for years and years, and we still have a few counties that haven't passed that yet, but I need to do more research there.
Okay. Can we ask Rule to
Yeah, if you want.
elaborate on that?
Rule, you want to go into a little more detail on the inventory tax versus the Freeport, just maybe break it down a little bit for folks?
I'm definitely not the revenue commissioner, but, you know, there's Freeports 1 through 4, and it depends upon the type of manufacturing that you do as to what Freeport that you can qualify for. But the big issue is I think that the state has put the provisions in for local to be able to vote for these particular Freeports, but not a lot of them are doing it. So ultimately, you know, and I hate to make this this analogy, but it seems like it's almost like a drug addict. You know, you have somebody there that's addicted to this revenue that they think is what is helping them, but overall, it's bad for you. You know, and you have to kick these bad habits in order to get healthy. And I think we've been on this this treadmill of an inventory tax that ultimately you've seen it bolster South Carolina, it's bolstered Florida. And, you know, we've got to work together, and especially it's so important in a commission like this that, you know, we start to shine a light on it and see how it affects everyone overall in the state, especially logistics. You guys are going to be moving this inventory. And people right now, they're having to operate with lean manufacturing just in time, just so they can they can compete with neighboring states. Does that help?
That's good. I'll look into it and give more at our next meeting.
And I'll also I'll get with the revenue commissioner, and I'll get the definitions of what the all 4 or 5 Freeports are. We've been talking with them as well with the Georgians First Commission, and we're running head first at trying to alleviate this to make Georgia competitive.
Thank you. Any other questions? And Chelsea, if you would make a note, maybe we can talk with the Department of Revenue to see if they can do a presentation at our next meeting also around that conversation. We'll be up in Dalton. That's a good place to manufacturing area with carpet and other industries to talk about it. Any other questions? All right. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
It's not on the agenda, but I want Tom Gell, who's one of our board members, to he's got some information, I believe, from Garden City where we're being hosted today, and I want to turn it over to him. They've got a request for us to at least consider as we move forward as a commission. Tom?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So Garden City, which is a host community, has asked that the commission consider a white paper that they've put together, and I'd encourage you to take a look at that. I think Chelsea may be sharing that with you after this meeting, but I'd encourage the commission to kind of examine ways to help address the impacts on host communities, which are freight transportation hubs. Obviously, Garden City is one, but there are many communities that also are distribution center communities, are warehousing communities, are hubs for these transportation systems. Additionally, I think Griff mentioned yesterday the Brampton Road connector. It's those types of projects that have grade separation that are needed not just in those transportation hub cities, but all over the state. And it's not just state roads, it's local roads too. You all know that many Georgia communities, very large number of Georgia communities are bifurcated by rail. And when trains stop, the economic activities on the main streets of Georgia are suffering. And as you, Chairman, said, small business is really a large part of Georgia's small town and medium-sized towns' economic vitality. And we heard, I think Commissioner McMurray talked a little bit about the LMIG funds. LMIG is so crucial to resurfacing projects across this state, but it's really inadequate at its current funding levels to meet some of the needs we have. I'd encourage the commission to look at possible recommendations for increasing the LMIG funds and perhaps creating a special set aside within the LMIG bucket to not only cover emergencies, economic development, and educational costs, but to also look at grade separation and freight hub impact mitigation. But I appreciate you all taking the time to Chairman, let me formally recommend the introduction of the Garden City white paper into the record, and I hope that we continue this conversation at future meetings.
And if you haven't already done so, if you would, give that to our staff, and they'll send a copy of that out to all of our commission members. And also all of our presenters, if you haven't already done so, if you would get that over to our staff, and they will send out an email with all the presentations you saw today, so you'll have an electronic copy of that. Also, for the presenters and for the commission members, I don't know if it's back there yet or not, but there's going to be some Jason Deli sandwiches if you want to take one of those either to go or eat it here at the conclusion of our meeting today, but that'll be available for both commission members and our presenters. Also, we're going to be meeting up in Dalton. I think you got an email on this, October 16th. There'll be an agenda that will come out, and we're going to be up in the carpet capital of the world in North Georgia. And a lot of the things we've talked about today, we're going to continue to have a deeper discussion on there in Dalton, so October 16th. And I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Beach for last comments and to close us out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for coming, and I want to thank the Commission for your hard work on this subject of freight and logistics. One of the things we saw yesterday was this port is an economic engine for our state, and it's going to continue with double-digit growth, so we got to prepare for it. And what I'd ask this Commission to do from here on out is come up with some specific ideas. I know, Ms. Skinner, I think you talked about public-private partnerships. Well, let's put something down on paper how we make that happen. So let's start thinking more on specifics from here on out of how we can implement some ideas and make some recommendations, if you will. Okay? And with that, does anybody else have any other comments from the Commission? Anybody from the audience want to say anything or make any comments? If not, we're adjourned and we'll see you in Dalton. Thank you.